The morning of my 70th birthday dawned with a quiet promise. Light filtered gently through the lace curtains, casting soft shadows on the worn wooden floorboards of the house I had cherished all my life. I sat near the window, the cup of tea warming my hands, heart heavy but hopeful. This day was meant to be different, a celebration of years filled with love, sacrifice, and countless memories made under this roof. I watched the garden where delicate flowers nodded in the breeze, a whispered reminder of time's unending passage. As the afternoon drew closer, the distant sounds of footsteps and voices stirred the stillness. One by one, they arrived: Rebecca, lively and bright-eyed as ever, Michael carrying a quiet seriousness that balanced her energy, and finally Craig, Rebecca's husband, whose presence always cast a subtle shadow on family gatherings. They greeted me with embraces and kisses, smiles that seemed sincere enough, yet carried an undercurrent I couldn't quite name. The dining room had been arranged with delicate care. Fresh flowers, polished silverware, and the old china that had served for generations. Everything was dressed for a joyous occasion, the flicker of candles waiting to be lit. The wine was poured, deep red and glistening under the chandelier's glow. Stories began to weave through the room, the familiar, comforting chatter of shared history. I listened as they recalled childhood mischief, youthful adventures, and family milestones. The warmth I felt then was subtle but tangible, like a thread knitting us close once more. But truth, as it often does, crept in silently before bursting into sharp, unbearable light. Craig stood, his glass raised, clearing his throat to draw the room's attention. A hush fell abruptly, the slight tension suffusing the air. I looked at him, searching for kindness in his gaze, but instead there was something cold, calculated, a flicker barely hidden behind a polite smile. To Margaret, he began in a tone that was disturbingly smooth. 70 years is an impressive milestone. Yet, I think we all know it's also a time when one can start to feel, well, more of a burden than a blessing. His words hung suspended for a moment. Then, the room erupted not in warmth, but in laughter. Not a tender laugh, but one edged with cruelty, dismissiveness. Rebecca and Michael joined in quick smiles, harsh eyes. I saw the undeniable glint of entitlement. It struck me then, raw and painful, that the family I had nurtured, raised with love and devotion, viewed me now with contempt. My years of sacrifice, the quiet nights spent comforting, the dreams deferred silently so theirs could bloom, all reduced to a punchline at a table. I felt my hands tremble slightly on the edge of the table, willing myself to stay still, to hold the fragments of my dignity in place. Their laughter felt like 100 needles pricking at my skin, exposing wounds I'd carried alone for years. The burden they named wasn't just age or frailty, it was the love they no longer returned, the respect they withheld. I wanted to speak, to remind them of the years I'd spent weaving the fabric of our family, to tell them of the countless nights I lay awake, fearing for their futures and well-being. But my voice failed me, caught somewhere deep inside between shock and disbelief. The room seemed to tilt, the faces of my children blurring into a bitter memory I was not ready to accept. Michael briefly caught my eye. There was a flicker of shame, or perhaps regret, but even his glance was fleeting, swallowed quickly by the crowd's jeers. Rebecca leaned in, her voice syrupy but edged with sharpness as she said, "Mom, it's really time you accepted it. We've moved on. You've done your part." The finality of her words settled heavily in the room. That instant, the house, my home, felt colder, more hollow than ever before. The walls echoed not with love's embrace, but with the harsh echoes of their greed and disregard. I sat in the midst of what should have been a celebration, yet felt like a stranger stripped bare before those I trusted most. Yet, beneath the crushing weight of betrayal, a small, fierce ember stirred within me. They saw me as a burden, yes, but they did not see what lay beneath the surface: years of patient strength, of silent observation, of carefully gathered resources and quiet plans born in solitude. As the laughter rolled around me like thunderclouds, I withdrew into myself, eyes sharp, mind alert. The children I had once known seemed lost to me, replaced by shadows cast in selfishness and entitlement. The truth was now undeniable, etched in their mocking voices and cold eyes. This night would mark the end of one chapter and the birth of another. No longer would I remain the passive figure diminished by their cruelty. Something was rising, a silent promise whispered in the deepest corners of my heart, a plan mature with patience and clarity, a reclamation of dignity that would honor not their greed but the years I had given freely. In their laughter, I heard the final confirmation of their disdain. In my silence, I gathered the resolve to move forward. The burden they placed upon me would soon be lifted, not with noise or anger, but with quiet strength, and from this pain, a new beginning would emerge. After the room emptied and the echo of their footsteps faded, I remained seated long after the last guest had left, the silence settling around me like a heavy curtain. The house, once alive with forced laughter and brittle smiles, now seemed colder, unfamiliar in its stillness. I stared blankly at the remnants of the celebration, the half-melted candles, the crumpled napkins, the faint scent of wine lingering in the air. Outside, the evening sky had deepened into a soft indigo, a quiet witness to the storm that had swept through my heart. I did not cry. The tears had long since dried, their residue a map of my unseen suffering. Instead, I sat quietly, allowing the weight of betrayal to press down on me, not as an unbearable burden but as a bittersweet awakening. The sharp edges of their words and laughter carved a new space within me, a silent chamber where grief mingled with clarity. The children I had loved with unfaltering devotion had exposed their true faces, and now I understood that my role in their lives had diminished in their eyes to nothing more than an obligation to be discarded. Memories drifted unbidden through the stillness, decades of sacrifice and quiet endurance rising like tide waters against my heart. I remembered nights spent waking to the soft breathing of my sleeping children, watching over them like a guardian, invisible yet unyielding. I thought of the opportunities I had shelved away, personal dreams sacrificed beneath the weight of responsibility and endless care. The countless times I had brushed away my own pain to patch their wounds, both seen and hidden. Every missed party, every unopened letter, every dollar saved and tucked quietly aside, all to build a safe harbor for their futures. Yet none of these acts mattered to them now. They had reduced my life's work to a line of cruel jokes and dismissive remarks. I felt the sting of that invisibility deeply, the realization that love and sacrifice are not always met with gratitude. And so, I sat there in the quiet, grappling not with sorrow but with an emergent resolve born from years of silent observation and patient endurance. In the solitude of that night, I began to listen anew to the whispers of my own untended needs, my hidden strengths. The years had taught me patience, yes, but also vigilance. I had quietly safeguarded my legal affairs, maintained control of our home, and managed finances with a steady hand, all while keeping the peace within our family. The resources I had gathered weren't just money or property, they were tools of empowerment, weapons fashioned from foresight and resilience. I let my mind wander through the details of these carefully preserved assets: the family home that held our collective history, the financial accounts I had kept separate and shielded from prying eyes, the possessions I treasured not for their value but for their connection to memories and legacy. These were mine to command, and at this moment, for the first time in years, a faint but steady seed of reclamation took root. Despite the pain, or perhaps because of it, I chose silence. I would not hurl accusations, nor engage in bitter confrontation. There was power in watching, in waiting, in letting my adversaries underestimate me as they always had. My strategy would be subtle and unyielding, a slow turning of the tide that would leave no room for dispute or denial. I no longer needed their approval or affection to define my worth. As dawn crept in, painting the walls with a pale light, I acknowledged a profound truth. This was my moment. Not to fight with angry words, but to act with measured determination. I began to outline the contours of a plan, one that would reclaim my dignity without shattering the fragile bonds of blood with open conflict. A plan to ensure that my sacrifices, my legacy, would not be erased or handed over to those who had declared me obsolete. The nights that followed were filled with moments of reflection and quiet resolve. By day, I maintained the calm exterior expected of me, engaging in routines that hid the tempest now building beneath. I observed my children's behaviors, noting the small cracks in their facades, the undercurrents of greed and entitlement that fueled their attitudes. Their laughter and careless words haunted the corners of my mind, reminders of the price I must pay but also the impetus for change. Memories floated through my consciousness: Rebecca's sharp tongue when I hesitated to give her what she wanted, Michael's cold distance when I sought comfort, and Craig's calculated jabs during family dinners. Each recollection was a thread, weaving the tapestry of betrayal that bound my future decisions. How many times had I swallowed my pride to protect the peace? How long had I allowed their disdain to eclipse my own voice? Tonight, the question was answered by the quiet steel growing inside me. I would no longer be their silent caretaker, their disposable mother. The years of quiet strength had taught me much, not least that power belongs to those who hold patience as a weapon and knowledge as an ally. I began gathering papers, bank statements, property deeds, records of past dealings, all evidence of a life carefully managed, a fortress of rights and resources built in subtle defiance. With these quiet truths in hand, I felt an unfamiliar lightness, a shedding of burden layered by sorrow but lifted by purpose. My plan would be slow, meticulous, and silent. I would watch and wait until the right moment presented itself, ready to transform pain into justice. Not out of anger, but out of a profound understanding that love is not ownership, and betrayal demands its own reckoning. I fell asleep that night in the quiet calm of new resolve, my heart heavy but steady. The next phase of my life was beginning, not as a passive figure diminished by the cruelty of those I loved, but as a woman reclaiming her life with quiet strength and unwavering dignity. Each breath became a promise whispered to myself. This burden, this pain, would be no more. In the weeks that followed, my quiet determination grew into a steady force beneath the surface of my daily life. I rose early each morning, moving deliberately through the rooms of my home, the floors creaking softly with each step. This house, steeped in memories and years of love and sacrifice, had become both my refuge and my battleground. I now saw it through sharpened eyes, those of a strategist preparing for a long game. One afternoon, I found myself dialing Samuel's number. He had been my trusted lawyer for years, a man of integrity and discretion who had handled my affairs with care. His office smelled of polished wood and old books, a place where justice felt tangible. When he answered, his voice was warm but professional as always. "I need your guidance," I said simply, voice steady now. "I want to make important changes. We met soon after in his sunlit office. Papers were neatly arranged on his polished desk, and I unfolded the plan taking shape inside me. Calmly, I spoke of the shifts within my family, the betrayal hidden beneath false smiles, the laughter hollowed by cruelty. I recounted the birthday, the painful words, and dismissals from the ones I had loved most. Samuel listened with unwavering attention, his gaze steady. When I finished, he nodded slowly. "It's time to revisit your will," he said. "One that truly reflects your wishes, free from influence from those who disrespect you." His words stirred something deep inside, a promise that I could seize control where I had only observed before. Together, we began reviewing my estate, the house holding decades of memories, the financial accounts I had carefully kept apart, the precious possessions steeped in sentimental value. I had always been meticulous, guarding these quietly. Now, with Samuel's guidance, I knew it was time to make my wishes irreversible. We discussed every detail. The will would name charities close to my heart: children's education, support for elder women, preservation of the local library as the beneficiaries of my wealth. My children would inherit only the memories held within the walls of this home, nothing more. This symbolic act would sever ties where love had frayed into neglect and greed. The process was painstaking, every phrase considered with precision, every clause a strategic choice. Samuel warned of potential challenges: anger, disputes, even legal battles, but I was resolute. This was no act of spite but justice, a reclamation of the future silently stolen from me. As days passed, I felt a transformation within. The heavy cloak of victimhood was shedding, replaced by a quiet armor of patience and strength. No longer the invisible mother lingering at their edges, I was becoming a force wielding foresight and preparation. Confidence blossomed, born not of anger but steady, deliberate action. The house responded in kind. Rooms I had avoided now seemed alive with new purpose. I sorted keepsakes with care, deciding which pieces of my past would be entrusted to those who deserved to honor them. Letting go was bittersweet, but it meant preserving a legacy beyond their greed. One evening, by the fireplace's soft glow, I pored over Samuel's final draft of the will. The weight of the words felt sacred. More than a legal document, it was my voice, my assertion of self-worth and autonomy, where silent pain met deliberate empowerment. I marveled at the quiet rebellion: no shouting, no confrontations, just steady, patient planning. I'd learned that silence wields power, watching and waiting, then acting not with rage but with resolute dignity. Thoughts of Rebecca and Michael, their greedy eyes and dismissive laughs crossed my mind. They thought they could claim all without question. They had underestimated the strength born from years of watchful observation and careful groundwork. The fortress I'd built in shadows no one noticed. My plan would unfold like a careful harvest. No sudden storms or upheavals. Instead, a steady revealing of truth and consequence. The house would stand, but their claim would silently crumble. Peace settled within me. Those years of silent sacrifice, unacknowledged love, were now the roots from which this new strength grew. The will would not just convey possessions, but who I was, my dignity, my refusal to be invisible. Slowly, I pictured life beyond this struggle, no longer defined by betrayal or pain, but uplifted by justice and renewed dignity. A future filled with quiet hope. When the will was signed, the moment felt both ordinary and profound. A calm clarity settled over me. This marked a beginning, not an end. A chapter where I no longer lived in the shadows but stood fully in my own light. The silent revenge I nurtured approached fruition not with spectacle, but with quiet assertion of my worth. That alone was a victory no one could take. Returning home that evening, I bore the quiet weight of my choice. The house awaited, familiar yet transformed through the eyes of a different woman. Walking its halls, fingertips brushing worn surfaces, I envisioned the moments ahead when my children would confront the reality I quietly shaped, when the intangible truths of love and betrayal would become undeniable. In my room, I began sorting through photographs and keepsakes, fragments of laughter, tears, milestones. These I catalogued with care, preserving a legacy not of possessions but of memories and true sacrifice, a testament beyond their shallow greed. At night, I sat at my desk drafting letters to the charities named in the will. The thought that my gifts might brighten a child's future, bring comfort to an elderly woman, or preserve lifelong learning uplifted me. These acts wove a new fabric for my life, one beyond betrayal and pain. In the solitude of those hours, I embraced my transformation deeply. The burden I carried for decades, the weight of expectation, sacrifice, invisible labor began to lift. Not by the hands of those I raised, but by my own deliberate, measured choice. With resolve deepened, I was forging a path ensuring my dignity would endure. A path honoring love even when gratitude failed to manifest. Despite the gravity of my plans, a growing lightness bloomed within, a freedom I'd long yearned to grasp. No longer defined by their dismissal, I reclaimed myself in pieces, paragraph by paragraph, decision by decision. Closing the last folder, placing finalized documents safely away, a genuine smile curved my lips for the first time in weeks. My silent revenge was born of necessity, not malice. Within its quiet power, I found a new peace. The time would come when the will was read aloud, the house filled not with laughter but with silent truth. Until then, I prepared not only my affairs but my spirit. For I was no longer the woman they discarded. I was a force of quiet determination, ready to reclaim what they thought was theirs all along. The day Samuel set for the reading of the will arrived quietly, with an ordinary calm that belied the moment's weight. Soft morning light spilled through the curtains, painting gentle patterns across the familiar floors where I sat composed, my hands folded neatly in my lap. My heart beat steady, not anxious or rushed, but filled with a patient anticipation that seemed to radiate from deep within. Months of preparation had culminated here. Every detail had been arranged meticulously, every feeling weighed carefully. This was to be a quiet reckoning, a deliberate unveiling steeped in dignity. The house, once alive with laughter and whispered memories, now hung heavy with untold history. My children entered the room cautiously, their expressions guarded, a mixture of curiosity and unease dancing behind their eyes. Rebecca's sharp gaze flickered with impatience. Michael's brow furrowed in quiet defense. Craig stood rigid, bracing himself for confrontation. I met their eyes with steady calm, as enduring as the walls that held the pulse of all our shared years. Samuel took his seat at the head of the polished table, a leather folder set before him like a shield of solemn purpose. With careful fingers, he opened it and began to read aloud. His voice was clear, measured, unhurried, each word carrying the gravity it deserved, filling the room with undeniable weight. The will laid bare the details of my estate, our home, the financial accounts, cherished possessions so familiar to those gathered. To an outsider, it might have seemed a simple inventory, but to my family, each announcement was a crystallizing moment, a reminder of what was no longer theirs to claim. The house, steeped in decades of memory, was to be entrusted to a local historical charity. Financial resources redirected toward foundations supporting children's education and elderly women's care. Treasured heirlooms destined for organizations pledged to honor their legacy with dignity. As Samuel's voice echoed softly through the room, I studied my children's reactions. Their initial curiosity ebbed into confusion, then settled into mute shock. Rebecca's breath caught sharply, Michael's jaw clenched tightly, his hands trembling ever so slightly. Craig's posture sagged under the weight of silent disbelief. No one interrupted the reading, awed into submission by the finality woven into each clause. When the last word left Samuel's lips, a heavy silence fell like a shroud. It was as if time slowed, the air thick with the acutely felt realization that their presumed inheritance was no longer within their grasp. The house, once symbolizing family unity, now stood as a testament to a shift none of us could deny. Behind the stunned faces, I glimpsed their private turmoil, anger mingled with regret, confusion tangled with a reluctant remorse. Yet beneath these emotions lay the raw truth: betrayal. They had scorned the woman who gave everything, diminishing her worth, trampling the foundation of respect and love on which this family was built. Their greed had severed more than just material ties. It had fractured the narrative of belonging. Samuel closed the leather folder gently, the soft snap echoing in the room. The silence lingered, punctuated only by the faint tick of the old clock I had inherited, a relic of enduring patience. A quiet, fierce strength welled within me. This was the moment I had waited for, the moment my long, silent reclamation blossomed into undeniable truth. Rebecca was the first to speak, her voice trembling yet desperate. "Mom, why? Why would you do this to us?" Her words echoed with a pain born not just of surprise but of a fragile entitlement unable to fathom anything beyond self. I met her gaze steadily, the years of unseen endurance framing my response. "Because, Rebecca, I will no longer allow your words to diminish my worth. For decades, I built a home and a family around love and sacrifice. This is the only way left to protect what I hold dear." Michael's usual reticence cracked as he muttered, "You're destroying what little family we had left." His voice was low but heavy with hurt, shining a spotlight on the depth of our fractured bond. I stood firm, unmoved as an ancient oak weathering long storms. Craig, an outsider entwined by marriage yet deeply implicated now, voiced his quiet frustration with grudging respect. "You've made your choice, Margaret. We never saw it coming so soon." With calm certainty, I replied, "I made this choice not in anger but in necessity. Love cannot survive where it is ignored and where respect is trampled underfoot." The exchange was not a fiery clash, but a tense, charged silence accompanied by lingering gazes heavy with unspoken regrets and truths. My rooted presence, fortified by patience and deliberate planning, commanded more power than any raised voice could have wielded. The justice I sought was manifest not through confrontation, but through the unassailable law that now framed my wishes. They left then, slow footsteps retreating down the hall, a solemn closing of one chapter, and the opening of another. The house, once burdened with unspoken grievances, now seemed lighter, as if the heavy weight I carried had finally lifted. The echoes of greed faded, replaced by the quiet dignity I reclaimed. In the days that followed, peace deepened around and within me. The house, freed from claims born of entitlement, became a symbol not just of place but liberation and self-respect restored. I welcomed dreams long suppressed, once distant and fragile, now vibrant and within reach. Travels I had postponed, friendships faded by time rekindled, the gentle joy of rediscovered independence all unfurled softly in my waking thoughts. Strolling through the garden, where blossoms had gently affirmed my 70th year, I breathed deeply, savoring freedom as fresh as spring air. For the first time in many years, despite the scars and sorrow, I felt unbound utterly. This was not a mere victory, it was a resurrection. The reclaiming of self beyond the reach of greed, disrespect, and neglect. My silent revenge was born not of malice but of the quiet necessity forged by years of sacrifice. Inside its still power, I found something precious, peace, a home for my spirit unscarred by bitterness or loss. It dawned on me then that true power lies not in confrontation or noise but in measured resolve, in steady preparation. The justice I sought did not demand spectacle, only unyielding purpose. This was a quiet, profound triumph, a reclaiming of dignity and self-worth no force could ever lift from me. The exchange that followed the reading of the will was quiet but heavy, a tension filled with unspoken regrets and truths that no words could fully capture. My presence, calm but resolute, commanded a power far deeper than any raised voices could muster. The justice I had sought was not in fiery confrontation, but in the unassailable law that now bound us all, a law shaped by my deliberate will and long patience. After that moment, they left the house. Their footsteps echoed down the hall with a slow finality, the closing of one chapter, and the opening of another, a chapter one would write on my own terms. The house, which had once felt burdened with unspoken grievances, now felt lighter, as if the immense weight I had carried silently for so long had finally lifted. The greedy echoes that once haunted its walls faded away, displaced by a new quiet dignity that I had reclaimed for myself. In the days that followed, a profound peace settled around me and within me. This house, once a symbol of entitlement and strife, became instead a monument to liberation and self-respect, to a life reclaimed from shadows. With this newfound clarity, old dreams that I had long shelved away began to stir, faint, fragile ideas that now blossomed with renewed vibrancy. Travels I had postponed for decades, friendships left to wither in the distance, the simple pleasures of daily life rediscovered, all unfurled softly, weaving themselves into the fabric of my waking thoughts. I wandered often through the garden, where the blossoms had greeted my 70th year with quiet affirmation. Breathing in the air, sweet and fresh as the coming spring, I felt unshackled for the first time in many years. The scars born from betrayal and heartache remained, but they no longer defined me. They were part of a past I had transcended. Freedom settled deep inside me, patient and steady. I understood that this was not simply a victory won over others, this was a resurrection of self, a reclaiming of the woman I had been beneath the burdens of greed and disrespect, a soul restored beyond the years of neglect. My silent revenge had grown not from bitterness or malice, but from a deep, quiet necessity born of years spent in sacrifice and watchful endurance. Within this still power, I found a treasure more precious than any material wealth: peace. It was a home for my spirit, untouched by resentment, unscarred by loss. It dawned on me fully in those serene moments that true power does not reside in noisy confrontations or visible battles, but in measured resolve, the steady preparation and unwavering purpose that moves quietly but inexorably. The justice I sought demanded no spectacle or dramatic flourish. It required only steadfast commitment and clarity of intent. This was the triumph I had nurtured, a triumph of dignity and self-worth that no force could ever strip away. Yet, even as I embraced this new chapter, the reality lingered: the fractured, painful ties with my children. Our relationship, once filled with warmth and promises, was now shadowed by misunderstanding and unspoken wounds. Their faces, once so familiar, had grown distant, clouded by greed and disillusionment. Their heartbreak, veiled behind sharp words and cold silences, haunted some of my quietest moments. But I no longer felt trapped by these fractures. Instead, I nurtured a space within myself where forgiveness could someday grow, not necessarily for their actions, but for the freedom of my own heart. I realized love, when true, must be without conditions or expectations. Sometimes, love requires release, not possession. In this new light, I began to imagine a life unbound by their judgments or flaws, a life full of possibilities and self-discovery. I pictured myself traveling to places I had dreamed of but never visited, reconnecting with old friends whose laughter and kindness rejuvenated my spirit, immersing myself in passions shelved too long by obligation. The joy of rediscovering myself became a balm, a promise of renewal. I took quiet pleasure in the small routines of life now, the softness of morning light on the windowsill, the comfort of a well-steeped cup of tea, the gentle rhythm of a favorite book's pages turning. These simple moments knitted together a new fabric of contentment that I felt in every fiber of my being. My journey was no longer about revenge in the narrow sense. It was about reclaiming what had always been mine: peace, respect, and the freedom to live authentically. I had learned that strength is often quiet, dignity often silent, and justice not always loud. My life, once overshadowed by burden, had awakened fully in the light of self-worth. And so, as days passed and seasons turned, I stepped forward into this fresh chapter with a heart finally unburdened. I was no longer the woman diminished by others' disdain, but a force of quiet determination, ready to embrace a fuller, freer life, one defined not by the past but by the strength I carried within. This was my silent revolution, a life reclaimed, one measured breath, one steady step at a time. With the burden finally lifted, I found myself stepping gently into a new chapter of my life, one defined not by the shadows of betrayal, but by the quiet glow of reclaimed strength. The weight that had pressed upon my shoulders for so long eased, replaced by a tenderness that I allowed myself to feel fully for the first time in years. I no longer lived in the silence of resentment but in the openness of acceptance and hope. Dreams that had been tucked away, almost forgotten, began to stir. The places I had dreamed of visiting, strangers yet familiar in photographs and stories, called to me now as invitations rather than distant wishes. I pictured wandering narrow cobblestone streets in foreign cities, breathing in new scents, meeting new faces, and collecting stories of my own. The anticipation of these travels brought warmth to my heart and lightness to my steps. I sought out old friends, the ones whose laughter and kindness had once filled my days but had grown distant over time. Reconnecting with them felt like slipping into a warm embrace. Their presence healed lonely spaces I hadn't realized were still aching, their voices a balm for rekindling my spirit. In their company, I rediscovered the joy of simple human connection without complication or expectation. Returning home after these gentle reunions, I took pleasure in the small rituals that had once passed unnoticed. The softness of morning light spilling across the kitchen table, the rich aroma of a well-steeped cup of tea in my hands, the comforting rhythm of turning pages in a beloved book. These moments, so modest and quiet, knitted together a new fabric of contentment that I felt deeply within every fiber of my being. Their simplicity reminded me that joy does not need to be loud or grand to be real. My days began to take a new shape, less burdened by anxiety or anticipation of conflict, more filled with peace and presence. I found joy in the things so easily overlooked before: the gentle rustling of leaves outside my window, the distant call of birds at dawn, the soft whispers of the wind. These whispers spoke to me of freedom, resilience, and the unspoken promise that life, even after hardship, holds endless possibility. I came to understand that my journey was no longer one of revenge in the narrow sense, but a profound reclamation of what had always been mine: peace, respect, and the freedom to live authentically. The strength I had once sought was not the loud anger of confrontation, but the quiet, unshakable dignity of standing firm in one's truth. I saw how justice is often silent, dignity often understated, yet their impact resonates far beyond the noise. Each morning, as I opened my eyes to the dawning light, I felt my spirit awaken fuller and brighter. The woman I had once been faded by discouragement emerged anew, shaped by resilience and enriched by wisdom. The echoes of betrayal no longer haunted me. They had become part of the mosaic that defined my strength and humanity. As days passed and seasons changed their hues, I moved forward with a heart unburdened by past grievances. No longer the woman diminished by the disdain of others, I embraced my identity as a force of quiet determination, steady, grounded, and gentle in its power. My life unfolded before me, no longer defined by old wounds but by the strength and grace I carried within. This was my silent revolution, a life reclaimed not through loud upheaval but through measured breaths and steady steps. Each day was a testament to the courage of letting go, of valuing oneself enough to walk away from what diminishes us. In this new chapter, I found freedom not given or granted, but earned by the steadfast refusal to be erased or silenced. In the quiet of my restored home, surrounded by memories both tender and painful, I finally felt whole. The peace that filled me was not fleeting but deep-rooted, a sanctuary where the past's scars no longer dictated my worth. I knew now that true liberation comes not from the vindication of others but from the forgiveness and love we cultivate within ourselves. And so, as the sun set softly beyond the garden's edge, I closed my eyes and breathed in the calm that only comes from truly finding oneself. In letting go, I had discovered everything.